I don't know if I have a story. Cuba is a small island, not as small as Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or the Antilles, but fairly small. And so, since Thomas Jefferson, who wanted to buy it, the U.S. has had an interest in Cuba also because we're very close. As original Cuban exiles from 59 and 61, we've moved around quite a lot. And I have a cousin who says, born in Cuba, American by choice, and that applies to me, certainly. My very first hearing of something called the Spanish-American War was about a month after I had arrived in this country at the age of 17. 60 years ago exactly, this January. And I was in an American history class, and the professor was talking about the Spanish-American War and the Spanish-American this and the Spanish-American that. And so I said in my then broken English, what the heck is the Spanish-American War? And she said, well, you should know. Why should I know? It was what we did in Cuba. Oh, you mean the Cuban War of Independence?
It was McKinley's Secretary of State who called this the splendid little war. A little war that would be quick, would be easy to win, and would kind of give the United States a boost and make the United States equal or on par with the big other Western European powers.
Henry Plant, the railroad baron who owned the railroads, sold Congress on the idea to make Tampa the port of debarkation.
And the railroad had only linked Tampa for about a decade. The railroad came in 1884, right through Lakeland here, all the way from the north, Jacksonville, into Florida.
A small city of 1,000 people was beset by 5 regiments of soldiers, starting in May, I think it was May 14th, 1898, and they were stationed at Lakeland through August of 1898. Now it increased the population of Lakeland from 1,000 to 9,000 soldiers that came in on top of the 1,000 citizens in Lakeland.
They were sent to Lakeland because Tampa was too full, no place to put them. There was ample water, there was close transportation to Tampa, so Lakeland was the ideal place, for them. And the troopers just had to endure.
I think life would have been very uncomfortable for these soldiers. Their uniforms were wool, they had to maintain their equipment, and also they had horses. So you've not only got men, but you've got an overload of animals as well. And they were spread out all around the little community of Lakeland, north, south, and west.
And they would actually just camp out downtown on the north shore, of course, of Lake Morton, where the Chamber of Commerce building is today. They camped out right there. The historical marker, of course, kind of tells that story. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that the street is named Massachusetts Avenue. Massachusetts troops were stationed there for a certain amount of time.
There was the 10th U.S. Cavalry, were the first to arrive. The 1st U.S. Cavalry was camped in Lakeland. The 71st New York Infantry, the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry, and the 3rd Ohio Cavalry. The 10th U.S. Cavalry, who were nicknamed the Buffalo Soldiers, were here from May through the first week of June. They were the very first regiment to arrive in Lakeland. Now this was one of 4 African-American regiments that were created after the Civil War by the United States Army.
So when they came here to Lakeland, that was a real eye-opener for this sleepy little town. The presence of the 10th Cavalry here in Lakeland was a positive influence on the black residents here in Lakeland. They saw these men hold their head up. They saw them with a sense of pride and dignity. And they saw them carry that with them everywhere they went in Lakeland, even in the face of racism.
I graduated from Rochelle High School in 1968. The school system in Polk County was segregated, so it was the black high school in Lakeland. I knew the Buffalo Soldiers had been a part of the Spanish-American War, but I had no idea that they had any connection with Lakeland, Florida, or Lake Wire. I mean, a lake that I'd been around numerous times. It didn't get taught in school, history, or anything. I didn't find out about that until I moved back to Lakeland in 2014.
70 years old. I'm a 100% disabled Vietnam veteran. So what else do I have to do? Huh? But try to educate, to try to share this part of the past that has been omitted from our history books, to try to share with those who do not know, in the hopes that they too will investigate and share not only the omitted history about the Buffalo Soldiers, but there are other parts of the past that has been omitted.
It is really interesting though, because I was born in Cuba, grew up in Cuba, went to school as a child in Cuba. And growing up in Cuba, you get the perspective, the Cuban perspective of what the Cuban War of Independence was and what the Spanish-American War was. And then as I got older and I started doing research and became an academic, I realized that, you know, there's other stories, you know, other ways of approaching, you know, that particular experience that conflict in some ways with what I was taught as a child. In Cuba, you don't talk as much about the Spanish-American War. The perspective that Cuba approaches is, it was literally the War of Independence. We had the perspective in Cuba that the Cubans were about to win the war when the Americans came in, so they kind of stole the victory from the Cubans. What I've learned recently is, or what I learned doing my research, is that that wasn't the case. There was a stalemate. So that's a perspective that I had never heard. You know, that the fact, what I've always heard is that we, the Cubans, right, were about to win when the Americans came in and they kind of stole that victory from us, which is a very different perspective.
History is something to discover. It's not something that's already written down and we just need to just write it one time and it's over. It's always being discovered, reinterpreted based on our own characteristics or our own thinking about what's important, what isn't important. And one of the ways that history changes, or at least our thoughts about history changes, are the questions we ask about the past. Say 50 years ago, we did not think about the role African Americans played, or Afro-Cubans, for example, in this instance. But the Afro-Cuban experience in the Cuban War for Independence, or the Spanish-American War, is very critical to our understanding of the event.
Growing up into different countries, what I learned is that every country makes an effort to come up with their own discourse that is going to sound very positive to that country national identity. You know, you get one side of the picture. And that's what most people get and what most people believe. You know, they don't hear their alternative discourses. So I think it takes people that are, you know, either interested in the topic or interested in history, that have a little bit more of a critical mind, that start doing the research, that to investigate. You know what I mean? And realize that everything is, like as I mentioned previously, not everything is black and white.
To study a historical event well, you have to really do military history and cultural history and plain history, the Americans. You have to do the same with the Spaniards. You have to do the same with the Cubans. Who has time to do that? And hopefully, you know, there are curious enough kids that would tackle it that way.
It's important for kids or young people that grow up here to know that your hometown was used for staging area for this war that took place in 1898. And then for young black kids, it's important to know that not only were there white soldiers, but there were black soldiers. It all pulls together being the story of being part of America. That success I had in the Air Force rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel. I made those achievements on the shoulders of all those men that came before me.
I think how we can honor those men is to, number one, tell the story. I know that one soldier that died and was buried here in Polk County in 1898, within the last 6 months, he had no grave marker. A grave marker and a memorial service was in place last November to honor and remember him. And at that particular dedicatory service, I reflected that now Private James Johnson, who was a Buffalo soldier, buried in Bartow's Evergreen Cemetery, that now he no longer is forgotten, he's remembered. Number two is to remember the sacrifices and the deeds that they did. You have to understand that soldiers give up their life, put their life in peril. We give up, as a soldier, you give up your rights to defend and preserve the rights of others. Very difficult decision to make, but once made is full steam ahead. I think that to not just pass over these men and soldiers, there's 1 or 2 markers in Lakeland. There were 5 regiments there. The corners where they might have stayed or touched Lakeland's history could also be marked. I think reenactors do a good job in causing memories to be stirred, that kind of thing. Myself, though, I think that this film is a great effort to recall their deeds, and so we can say that we are welcoming home those veterans of 1898 right now, today, in this place.